and I'm pleased to inform you, Mr. Chairman, we have quorum for the meeting.
Thank you very much. So we can begin. I want to welcome you after 12 hours from our last encounter, and welcome you to this fourth day. Officially, it's the fourth day of our meeting. Of course, we have a very important topic. It's the technology project, which Rich Haskell is going to lead the discussion. Let me only note that I hope that the discussion today is going to be a good formative step for the finalization of an exposure draft in December. So, as always, I want to ask everybody to be to the point, as constructive as possible, and in the interest of time, be succinct and brief. So, having said that, let me turn to you, Rich, and give you the floor to start on the technology.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and good day to everybody. I'm going to go through the presentation. There were going to be plenty of places we're going to stop for comment, but also joining me and is Richard Fleck and Cam, and they will at times jump in wherever they see fit to add some commentary or help respond to some things. There is a lot of material here. I'm going to move pretty fast through it, and we will try to take plenty of chances to pause and take questions. And we want to make sure we get the full sense of the board on as many aspects and areas as the board sees fit. So we'll move to the next slide. We've got two objectives. Obviously, the first read of the proposed draft of an ED, and most importantly, indicate matters that warrant further consideration by the task force based on the board's views. So if we can move into a little bit of background, I want to set a stage here. On the next slide, please. I just want to remind the board, and I'm sure many of you will remember this quickly. The phase one report and the project plan went out in December of 19. That was before Roll and Mindset was completed and before the NAS project was completed. And both of those took important steps that did in fact address some or all, certain, in some cases all, but in most cases some aspect of some of the things that were in the phase one report. And we will go through those just momentarily. And then of course we had the two surveys that we spent a fair amount of time in prior meetings walking the survey results through. And of course there's been excellent stakeholder outreach. I would comment that the working group conducted 21 outreaches before the December 19 session, or the issuance of the phase one report, and another 26 since that time frame before the task force took over and has done some additional outreach. And at the very end, I will talk about further outreach, which is planned. But let's go through a couple key points from the Roll and Mindset and NAS projects. If we could go to the next slide, please, that impacted on this project. And so on the screen here, you can see that in Roll and Mindset, there was the emphasis that was placed on the Responsibility to Act in the public interest. There were enhancements to 4 of the fundamental principles with explicit reference to technology. It introduced the requirement to have an inquiring mind, and it underscored the importance of organizational culture rooted in ethics. In addition, on the next slide, it addressed some considerations regarding where competence needed to be had for a variety of factors, including technology-related developments. It also emphasized the importance of not placing undue reliance on individuals or technology, and we will build on that a little bit, you'll see. And obviously, it brought in the automation risk. The NAS project on the next slide introduced the fact that there is continual change going on in the financial markets and with technology, making that impossible to draw all exclusive list. But it did bring in the concept of the importance of technology from a PA perspective. On the next slide, NAS also talked about the importance of understanding the manner in which a service is provided in identifying and evaluating threats. It provided some clarification on routine or mechanical. And you'll see in a moment, we'll do some more with that in this project, and made it clear that there are prohibitions on service involving designing or implementing IT systems that form part of the internal control over financial reporting or impact on the accounting records or financial statements. All very important develop components of what the technology project then picks up from. So let's move into parts 1, 2, and 3 in the next section. If we could move to the next slide. We're going to walk through, I'm going to give an overview here, and then we're going to walk through the individual elements and paragraphs as the task force has put forth. I would remind the board that we did send out a draft in August, and we appreciate very much the feedback that was provided on that, and that feedback was incorporated into the version of the documents that were posted for this meeting. Since the posting, we have received, including just a few minutes ago, some more. We have received feedback from a number of the board members, some in writing and others verbally. And those are all very helpful and much appreciated. As we go through this, though, please make sure you point out the substantive points that you are focused on, because in some cases, we're going to want to make sure we understand whether the board's directional guidance on those matters. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what is proposed with regard to potential revisions in parts 1, 2, and 3 of the code. We will expand the guidance to acknowledge technology in describing the fundamental principles, highlight certain professional skills, introduce the concept around confidentiality of a data governance cycle, and provide a definition of confidential information. We do introduce complexity as a factor in applying the conceptual framework, and then provide some technology related guidance for when identifying threats to the conceptual framework and fundamental principles, and then factors professional accountants should consider when relying on technology. So those you'll recognize much of that expands on aspects of role and mindset. So let's move to professional skills at this point. And focus on 113 1A1. And this is designed to address, is designed to build off of role and mindset. So I'm sorry, I'm having some technical problems here with my screen. Designed to build off a role and mindset to emphasize some specific skills. They are not necessarily, they don't reference just technology in this proposed edit because it was believed that they encompass a broader set of skills, and they are all skills that are referenced in the education standards. If we can move to the next slide, please. This is 113 3A1. Tries to address some of the challenge you get between transparency and confidentiality. It introduces the use of the reasonably informed third-party test for the professional accountant to use in considering whether it's made adequate description of the information it uses to explain the nature of its services or activities, and importantly, limit the limitations inherent therein. And it emphasizes the relevance using that reasonable informed third party test, I should say, is similar to the approach taken in NOCLAR. The next slide is on confidentiality, and you will recall that in the last board meeting, we had an option A and an option B. Option B substantially rewrote the confidentiality, condensed it down, and there was little support from the board at that meeting for that. There was a preference to option A clearly, which largely left the main sections intact with some additional, with the desire to clarify. And so that is how we've proceeded. You will note that this introduces the concept of the professional accounting taking appropriate action to secure confidential information, and then it includes introduces what I'll call the data governance cycle, in that it addresses that needs to be done over the course of the collection, use, storage, and dissemination and lawful destruction of such data. And importantly, we in the next slide have a definition of confidential data that has been developed. It includes all forms, whether it be electronic or oral or written or visual, and it recognizes that the confidential information can come in all mediums and can have a lot of ease of access. And it simply says it's confidential if it's not in the public domain. With that, I'm going to move to the slide to address complexity. We, as you recall, the survey had a fairly high response rate to wanting something in the code to address, which was also addressed in the issues paper and in prior strawmans. And we have tried to highlight complexity as a factor in decision-making while applying the conceptual framework. So if we can move to the next page, the first part of this introduces in 120.13a1 complex circumstances and the fact that those can increase the challenges in identifying, evaluating, and addressing the threats to the fundamental principles, and then provide some examples where the matters involved, the circumstances can be interconnected or interdependent. They can be uncertain or unpredictable. They can involve multiple variables and assumptions. Those all add to the complexity or the increased challenges that complex circumstances bring. On the next slide, then, think considerations for the PA in dealing with complex circumstances, references the importance of the inquiring mind, reminds them, PAs, that it's important to include experts, involve experts and seek expert experience. It's important to discuss those inherent uncertainties or difficulties arising from the facts and circumstances or the technology with the relevant stakeholders, and also references the need to monitor the complex circumstances, or indicates that you need to understand how those complex circumstances may be impacting or changing any impact on judgments that have been made. With that, if we could go to the next slide, I had mentioned on the summary slide that we then place some factors that are relevant for when identifying threats to compliance with the fundamental principles, including the functions of the technology involved. This is all very technology specific, obviously. The appropriateness for which the technology is used, whether the accountant has the expertise to understand that technology, to use it, and to explain the output from the technology, and the fact that the technology could involve expertise or judgments attributable to the firm or employing organization, which might create self-review and self-interest threats, are all factors to be considered. We then we're gonna go a little out of order here if you're following along with the extant code. We then talked about factors to consider in 220, and there are some corresponding factors to this in 320, although they are not exactly the same word for word, because there are slight differences between professional accountants in business and professional accountants in practice. But this is a factors to consider when relying on technology. And among those, again, the nature of the activity to be performed by the technology, the expected use or expected reliance on the technology, and what the output from that technology is, and then the professional accountant's ability to understand that output from the technology in the context of which it was used, among others, are listed there. With that, I wanted to reference one other item which related to ethical leadership. On the next slide, 120.14A3, we have prompted PAs to demonstrate ethical behavior, and that public trust arises in that ethical behavior. And so the extant code has been added to demonstrate ethical behavior in dealings with business and organizations which the accountant or firm or employing organization has a professional or business relationship. And that I think is consistent with these acting in the public interest emphasis that was placed in role and mindset. So that is the substantive pieces of parts 1, 2, and 3. I'd like to we're going to pause there and open it up for question and comment from the board, and look forward to input.
Thank you, Rich. So this is open for discussion from the board. Please raise hands to comment. I see Michael. Mike?
Thanks, Davros, and thanks, Rich. At the outset, I would say I'm much more comfortable with the general sense of direction of all of this. Did you want to go? You went through an awful lot there.
Yep.
And I have comments on quite a bit of it. Did you want to sort of do a bit at a time, or how do you want to do it?
No, I would be open to, if you want to give us all your comments, or if you just, I think, because well, my view would be, if you want to give us all, that would be helpful, because that may trigger thoughts from others on the call.
Okay. Turning first then to 113.3A1, which is the insertion of the reasonable informed third party test. I don't have any problem at all with using the reasonable informed third party test. My understanding of the structure of the code, and I'm not an expert in this, as people know, was that if the accountant is applying judgment, and clearly it's a judgment as to what information needs to be provided to the employing organization or a client, then they are obliged to use the reasonable and informed third party test. So the might use just struck me as very odd language.
Okay.
But as I say, I'm very happy to be corrected on my understanding of the code structure.
Okay, taken. We'll look at that.
Go on, Mike.
Yeah, please,
Okay.
Please go through your list.
Yeah, and sorry, I'm just flicking down screens. You'll forgive me.
No, I understand.
I'm slightly troubled in 120.6A5, because this obviously applies to professional accountants in business as well as employing organizations. With the way the last bullet is expressed, where it says whether the technology uses expertise or judgment attributable to the firm or employing organization and might create self-review or self-interest threats. I think it's almost inevitable that somebody who is working for an organization will be using technology which has been put in place by that organization and almost implicitly has some element of expertise or judgment attributable to it. I think it would be slightly invidious forcing everybody to think about, oh, what's the self-interest threat here or a self-review threat? I'm not sure I I quite see it as starkly as that. And I'd be worried that it just raises a red flag when in an area where we don't need to raise a red flag. I think in the context of providing services to clients, you're in potentially a slightly different ball game. But even there, I think you've got to be cautious. But certainly in the context of employing organizations, I think it would be very difficult to say that any of the technology doesn't have some element of expertise or judgment attributable to the employing organization in this day and age, because very few people just put things in straight off the shelf. And I'm just going down the list. If I pick up one that you haven't covered by mistake, let me know that as well, because I'm just working through the sections. Yep. So 120.13A3, the third bullet, where you say using technology to provide relevant information quickly and frequently. I just wasn't convinced that that was an action that would necessarily help. Getting lots more data about a complex situation doesn't necessarily assist you in dealing with it. The other points I think are very valid. I was less convinced about that one. And then, sorry, we haven't gone on to 220 yet, have we?
No, we have.
We have.
I did.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So the thing I found slightly interesting was I'm pleased that we've got it in both 220 and 320, the factors to consider on relying on technology. I was slightly concerned that we were using slightly different words in the two without necessarily understanding the rationale for doing that. So in 220.7A2, we've got the last bullet, which talks about the whether it's been successfully used in similar circumstances. In 320.10A2, we've got the first bullet, which says the extent to which the specific technology is established and recognized use for the purpose intended. And I kind of thought they're both trying to get at the same sort of thing. And do we really have to use different words to express the same concept? Because it's like all these things. If you use different words, people think there's a different meaning. And do we really intend that? Would be my question. Yeah. And the more we can conform those two, the better. And I'm still slightly uncomfortable with 220.7A3 sort of tacked on in terms of the accountant's opportunity and ability, because it's not really just their opportunity and ability, it's actually whether or not they're in a position that they need to, almost. You know, if you're a junior person in an organization using a piece of technology, you are inherently going to be relying on superiors with more expertise and knowledge than you have to have got the thing right in the first place. So it's not so much just the ability and opportunity, it's the fact of, is that part of my job description, frankly? Mm-hmm. Is it expected of me? Because if it's not expected of me as part of my job, then if I don't do it, then people are not going to be disappointed I haven't done it, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
I think that was me done. Although no doubt when other people chip in, I'll think of something else I've missed.
All right. Well, and we have struggled with that last point because that's what we're trying to protect against, that there are roles that it's just not in the individual's job.
Yeah, I think you might try looking at, can you express it as, is there an expectation that the individual would be in a position to? You might toy with language around that aspect.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. I see Lisbeth. Excuse me, Rich, you want to comment on Mike's points?
No, all of them well understood. We we'll take a look at the point on the 126A5, the well, how much for PAIB, particularly the self-interest and self-review comes in. 120.13A3, I think we've been trying to get the concept of frequency can be an issue. And I don't think we had thought about it from the point that Mike made, that more information frequently may not necessarily help you address that. We'll take a look at the wording. We were trying to be succinct, and in doing that, we may have created what appears to be two different things that intended the same. So I understand each of those comments. Very, very helpful.
Okay. So let me proceed with Lisbeth, please. Lisbeth.
Thanks, Stavros. Rich, I actually find it a little bit difficult to follow the discussion without actually seeing the provisions on screen. So is there a possibility that we point out which provisions we will be talking and then do it one by one? Because I heard a lot of good comments from Mike, but it was very hard for me to follow that discussion. But, well, it's up to you to decide if you want to move forward the way we are doing it now, and then I'll talk you through each of my points as well. But I have a feeling that, well, others might be missing some particular comments.
Can we go, I don't know who's controlling the slides, but can we take it back to the very first one, 113 on the screen? Okay, and we'll go one by one, Elizabeth, if that helps. And I guess what Stavros we might do is just let everybody comment at the same time on each section, if that's okay.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. So
okay.
Let's start with 113.1.
Very helpful. All right.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Well, on this one, the issue I'm having with it is that it looks like there is some verb missing, and action is missing. So how are you going to demonstrate that you actually comply with the fundamental principle of professional competence and due care by having just that reference to interpersonal communication and organizational skills? Is it the mere fact of having those skills that you're in compliance with the fundamental principle? Or do we expect actually more so that you perhaps need to exercise it? So that's my main concern with it. And I've said it before. I'm still not 100% certain. I fully grasp the link with technology, but I'm not going to debate that further. I think we talked about that enough already. Okay. So that's what I have on this one, and okay. I'll come back for on the next one. Right. Thank you.
Let me see. Thank you, Lisbeth. Let me see if anyone else has a comment on 113.1 at this point. Sadia?
Thank you, Stavros. So firstly, I just want to say that I'm very pleased to see the link to the education standards being removed. But as we did that day, I was wondering whether organizational skills would be widely understood on what it really is getting at. I was happy with interpersonal communication, but organizational skills, I wasn't certain that it would be widely understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, thanks. I'm actually on the other side of that issue. In relation to the changes to 113, I remain concerned that the reference to the IESs or how these have been implemented by national standard setters in their jurisdiction has not been included. Given that these standards and the requirement for IFAC member bodies to have standards of competence at least as rigorous as those in the IESs, it seems to me that leads to a lack of consistency in terms of expectations for PAs and a lack of clarity around what this means. And some of the comments that I've heard so far about what competence means and so on, and looking at the commentary of the disposition of the task force's consideration of both member and TA views, I was also left with feeling like there's a lack of consistency in terms of what is being included as competence and what isn't. And I think it makes it abundantly clear if there's a reference to IESs or how any given jurisdiction has implemented those obviously within their jurisdiction, because PAOs, NSSs have competency maps and frameworks and so on, and that's precisely where I would argue we want members to go to find that information about what is the minimum standard of competence and what does it include. And the fact that it includes professional knowledge and skills and interpersonal organizational leadership skills, values, and so on, those are all contained within either the IESs if the jurisdiction has simply implemented those directly, or if they have adopted them and are doing something that is, as the statement of member obligations indicate, no less rigorous than. So I think we're still missing that here. Thanks.
Thank you. Vanya?
Thank you, Stravos. Thank you, Rich, for the presentation so far. But at this point, we are discussing about the professional knowledge and skills that technology demands. And it was just yesterday that Ian and I met with the Helen and Greg from the education panel. And they would like to know when would be the best moment for them to interact with this technology group and the working group as well, in order to work together and make sure that these skills are there for the preparation of the future professionals.
Thank you, Vanya. I don't see any other comments on this. So, Rick, back to you.
No more comments.
Okay. Thank you, Ola and Vanya. We can reach out to them, although I know I participated. I thought we had one session with them already, but we can certainly follow up. Next topic, I think we had up on the slides, if we could move one slide forward, I believe is now 113A1. And as you noted, Mike made a good point on the use of the word might there. But please, other comments on this section?
Sungnam?
Yes, a small thing at the end of this paragraph, therein, this word is, we are discouraged from using this word under the guidelines. So we may need to change therein to something else.
Okay, thank you.
Caroline?
Thanks, Stavros. Thanks, Rich. So with this change, it requires the professional accountant to evaluate whether the information would be sufficient to enable the recipient of the information to understand the nature of such services or activities and any limitations. So if we're talking about PAPP, there would be in delivering professional services, there would be an engagement letter that sets out the scope of work, and that would set out the nature of the service. But if we're talking about a PAIB, then it would mean that PAIB would have to explain the nature of his or her work, which I think doesn't seem necessary. And the original paragraph is, the original requirement is really focused on inherent limitations. If there's any inherent limitations, then that would be what you need to make your client or your employing organization or the user of your work be aware of. So I don't think it is practical to require the nature of the service or the activity to be disclosed in all instances. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, you want to come back?
Thanks, Davros. I just react slightly to Caroline because I didn't read it like this, in the sense of I read it as an obligation to be, for the PAIB to be comfortable that whoever he was delivering the work to understood what the accountant had done to produce that and any limitations there was in it. I think in most circumstances in an employing organization where tasks are delegated, then, if you like, that will almost be implicit. I do think, though, there may be occasions when it is necessary for the person who has conducted the work to explain to the person to whom they are delivering it what exactly it is they've done and why, you know, what the foibles or other things might be in what they've produced. I don't think this requires somebody to go into a long explanation on every piece of work they do. They need to be comfortable that the person receiving it understands what the output's all about. So I wasn't as worried about that as Caroline is, speaking as a PAIB.
Okay, thank you. Lisbeth and then Brian. Please try to be brief because time is not infinite. Lisbeth.
Yeah, no, given Mike was disagreeing with Caroline, I want to emphasize that I agree with Caroline's point. And I think it's because how the sentence is written now. It's where appropriate, you shall make your client aware of the nature of the services and the limitations inherent therein. So it feels like you need to pass those two steps. And what is unclear is actually the where appropriate. In the previous construct, it was clear that that was just dealing with the situation of when there are limitations. But by having now the addition of nature of the service, it creates, well, some reference to a certain circumstance, which is actually not described any further. So I am in agreement with Caroline. I actually think that reference to nature of services or activities can be removed, because when you talk about some limitations, you will automatically have to address the type of activity and why it creates such issues.
Yeah, can I ask, if I may, for some clarification? Are you saying you're concerned about actually the paragraph before this one and the changes that were made there?
Well, it's the combination of the two, yeah.
Okay.
It's the two together that give that impression that a PAIB every morning when they are a CFO, they have to start telling everyone what they're going to be doing every day and whether or not there are any limitations in those activities. The problem is the shall that makes it an obligation to do that.
Okay. I don't think that's, I think we intended it more the way Mike described it, but points taken, and we'll take a look at that language.
Brian, please.
Thanks. Just on that point quickly regarding the nature of the services, I recall, and I think I'm more on Mike's side, but I think I see elements of what Caroline and Lisbeth are saying as well. In a prior construct, it referred more clearly to technology use and the specific limitations in that area, and I thought that captured it better, because I do see some lack of clarity at this point in this area. But main point I want to raise is referring to certain keywords explicitly, and here I'm speaking specifically about transparency. I don't view that as just being an editorial change to include words like transparency, and I mean in other sections later, so I won't say it there. Explainability would be another one of those. There's over 190 different AI ethics frameworks around the world in which words like, and principles, I mean, these are high-level principles, right? Transparency and explainability are very easily within the top 10 principles that are consistently referred to. And so it seems odd for a user who ends up in the code to not find those words. And so I don't think, and I don't think it's problematic to include words like that, particularly because they are heavily, heavily used around the world in exactly the same context that we are envisioning them here, and through the same concepts that are being brought out. So I think it's amiss if we don't have reference to those words within there directly, because non-authoritative educational materials are only going to go so far. If a user comes directly to the code, which we would anticipate that they would, that's our primary tool of broadcasting what the expectations around ethical behavior are. And so I think those words are important because that's what the common parlance is for what the expectations are. Something we've heard directly from regulators and national standard setters throughout the outreach process. So just ask that that be reconsidered. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, Rich, can we go on?
Yes, please. Let's go to the next slide quickly. This was the confidentiality slide. Comments on 114.1A2.
Brian, again? Brian?
And your hand's still up.
My hand's still up. In this case, it's in reference to the word privacy. And again, I might just suggest the same argument. That's something people will look for. The other way of addressing that in this instance, I would say, could be through a change to it's a back end of the eCode issue. If you search for privacy, you end up hitting confidentiality regardless. The only issue with that is that it doesn't, again, necessarily indicate to the reader that we considered privacy explicitly, and that I fully agree, this is a legal construct, but in some way referring that back to the obligations of a PA to consider local laws and regulations, I think might be an appropriate step here. Thanks.
Galen?
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry about the delay there. Yeah, the last phrase, I wonder, where it says dissemination and lawful destruction, seems a little bit of harsh wording there. And you might consider disposition, lawful disposition, which would cover dissemination, would cover destruction, but you also have numerous jurisdictions that require retention of information. So I think it might be a little bit more positive than how it's presented there. Minor point, but there you go.
Good, thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you, Galen. Lisbeth?
Yeah, I have a suggestion with regards to the order. I actually think that this new paragraph A2 fits better with the R paragraph. So I would recommend that you make that replace the extant A1 with this A2. So then it's all about how to comply with the principle of confidentiality. So doing everything that is described here. And then in extant A1, that would become A2, then that's dealing then with situations where you can overrule confidentiality, and that links better with A3 then. And then with regards to the list of all actions, is there anything missing in that list? So what's the meaning of that word including in there? Isn't it just to secure information in the course of collecting, using, storing, disseminating, and destroying it?
Okay. Yeah, Elizabeth, I understand that comment. Maybe it is flows better if we move the order. We'll take a look at that, and also I hadn't thought about that, including suggest there's something else, and I'm not sure there is. So appreciate that.
Ken has a comment.
Yeah, there's an alarm that's gone off in the background. Okay, that stopped. Sorry, Rich, I don't know if you've gone past the definition of confidential information, and
No, that's on the next slide.
oh, it's on the next slide. Okay.
Yeah.
I just had a comment on this one.
But go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, no, it just struck me that the definition is very, very broad, because it's essentially saying anything that is not in the public domain. And and if I were to apply this broad definition to all the requirements in section 114 regarding a professional accountant's obligation, to protect the confidentiality of information. There can be a huge range of information within an organization, and to put information about a contract between my employing organization and a business partner or a client, compared with let's say information about a birthday party or a barbecue that my organization is throwing up for the summer at the same level, to me strikes me as perhaps sort of one step too far. If you see what I mean. I could be having a social conversation with you, for example, and tell you how I spent my summer, and if the code might prohibit me from saying anything about my company's barbecue, but on the other hand, I can understand if I've been involved in contractual negotiations with a client, that I certainly should be really watching carefully what I'm saying, and not disclose anything that wouldn't have received the client's consent or the partner's consent. Is what I mean. So it just struck me as being very broad, and I just wondered whether, rather than kind of couch it in kind of the negative form to say anything that's not in the public domain is confidential, whether we might not perhaps tie it more closely to the concept of consent, because consent really indicates that there is a level of importance attached to the privacy of information, and therefore it shouldn't be divulged to to everybody out there without the other party's sort of consent, whether it's implicit or explicit.
Okay, understand.
Richard, you have your hand raised. I think you want to respond to something. Richard Fleck, hello.
Richard, you're on mute. So.
Yep. Very briefly, the problem with your approach, Ken, is that depends on people actually asking the question, is this confidential or not? And the reality is that 99.9% of conversations never focus on that sort of discussion. And the standard way of dealing with confidentiality in all agreements is to say, if it's not in the public domain, it's deemed to be confidential. Now, you obviously the personal argument can be excluded by reference to matters that that relate to the business. But then you have somebody who's a chief executive talking about the fact that he's ill, and that's highly confidential and relevant to the business. So the drawing the line is extremely difficult, and the working hypothesis is, if it's not public, as a professional man, whether you're a solicitor, a lawyer, or an accountant, I would suggest that your starting point is that it's confidential. If you want to say to somebody, is that confidential? And the person says no, well, then you're fine. But the hypothesis, it should be that you start from confidentiality, and that's consistent with the professionalism.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
Can we go to the next one, Rich?
Yes, there's no more comments on either one of these. Move forward again, another slide. We're going to talk about the complexity. So this is 120, starts 120, 13A1, and obviously on through the bottom of the slide after this, but let's start here with these two paragraphs.
Okay, Mike has already made a comment on this.
Right.
I see Richard Fleck again. Richard? Oh, no, I don't.
No, it's Brian.
Brian.
Great, thanks. So first off, I just wanted to say, I think this has gone a long ways, and I think it's going very much in the right direction in terms of the amount of detail and the information that's been included in the section. So I think that's great. There's one step, sort of one mitigation that I think is missing in this, and that's really, and it's kind of the first step, in managing and mitigating complexity in a situation, and that's the notion of recognizing and differentiating the complex elements. That's really what allows a PA to identify which aspects of a situation or the circumstances that can be solved, because there's often areas that you simply can find an answer to, regardless of how difficult it is to solve something, you can solve it, versus those aspects of the circumstances that need to be managed because of the dynamic, interrelated nature of the situation. So that's just one fine point that I think could be added, but otherwise I think it's going the right way. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Lisbeth?
Yeah, I'm having serious problems with these paragraphs, and well, there are two on screen that actually have issues with all three of them. First of all, let me start with the easiest one. The A2, the examples of, that to me is really not a clear example. I don't understand the reference to interconnected or interdependent elements. I can get there thanks to that presentation that Brian gave us a while ago on the difference between complicated and complex, but users of the code haven't taken that or haven't looked at that presentation. So when you get to read these words just like that, I don't think they will mean much to the users of the code. And so I have been reflecting a lot on what are we trying to get to here? What are we trying to resolve as an issue? And it made me step back a little bit and think about how the conceptual framework works. It is about having an inquiring mind. So it's looking at all the facts and the circumstances when you are dealing with an ethical issue. And yes, that might create some challenging situations on what am I going to do with that ethical problem I'm trying to resolve. And that's where the point of exercising professional judgment comes into play. And that basically, when you read all these paragraphs I was referring to, so on inquiring mind and professional judgment, and I'm pointing out specifically here to 125A5, it actually gets you to what all of this is trying to say. So unless we can get it in a much clearer and not such a complex way into the code, potentially, yeah, I can agree with it, but the way it is now, I really don't see any true value in it. And actually what confirms my thinking or my direction of thinking is all these actions that are described in A3, they actually come back in that paragraph on exercising professional judgment as well. So that demonstrates to me that it is implicit in those paragraphs. And so I really don't see any purpose or need to have this specific section here.
Thank you. Caroline?
Thanks, Stavros. So I guess the way I see it is that when we are thinking of complexity, it should relate back to the fundamental principle of professional competence and due care, and whether or not we have sufficient competence in order to deal with the complexity of the circumstance. Whereas in putting it here, we are then saying that we have to deal with the effect of complexity in the application of the conceptual framework, which I think is wider than what was intended. And then also, if I look at the actions, the first action of applying an inquiring mind would that not already be covered in the conceptual framework that there is a requirement to apply an inquiring mind? So I'm not sure why we reiterate it here. And some of the bullets that follow, to me, it seems like it's really about consulting and discussing, but described with another person, but described in just various different ways. So consulting with others, including experts, discussing the uncertainties or difficulties. And then the third bullet of using technology to provide the relevant information. So if technology is complex or technology gives rise to a complex circumstance, using technology to deal with that, I'm just a bit confused. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Can we go back to A2? I have a simple suggestion here.
Sure.
If this is the time, but
yep, please.
In 120.13A2, I thought that we don't need all the words that are in there, both interconnected and interdependent with an or, and both uncertain and unpredictable with an or. If we took one out from these two couples, I think the expression would not lose any meaning, any meaningful item, but it would be a lot simpler and a lot better to understand. Because the way it is, one starts thinking, what's the difference between interconnected and interdependent? What's the difference between uncertain and predictable? So, simple suggestions.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful. Other comments on 120.13, either A1, 2, or 3?
Brian.
Thanks. Yeah, just a quick follow-on comment to some of what's been said. With respect to complexity being just a PC and DC issue, I'd argue that it's not. So, for example, complexity and bias can interact to impact objectivity. So there are other fundamental principles that can be impinged, which is, so again, I think the location is about right where it is in terms of some of the other circumstances that are discussed that can impact the application of the conceptual framework. And then I actually also agree with Stavros's point there. Some of those words probably could be taken out. It's more around the interdependent issue, but I think I would probably argue it's uncertain and unpredictable. Now, whether you need both of those words or not is probably something that needs to be thought about a little bit more. But I think that could be cleaned up. But conceptually, I think it's accurate what's in there. But anyways, thanks.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful, Brian.
Okay, can I go to Sadia?
You. So I have a question first, and then I have a query on top of the questions. The first question is a complex circumstance going to be complex regardless of who the professional accountant is? So one professional accountant will see it as a complex circumstance, and the second one would also see it. And if that's the case, and I know complex circumstances is not only limited to the influence of technology, how would you identify a complex circumstance so that you know that you are in this application material to consider this? And as I considered this, noting that respondents to the survey asked for it, I was unsure of how I would come up with a suggestion to define that circumstance, because it's my personal reflection would be that it's a rarity. It's not every common situation that is complicated will give rise to a complex circumstance. And getting that definition is the incorrect one, but getting some kind of understanding of what that is important on how the application paragraphs would follow. Thank you.
Thanks, Sadia. And finally, Lisbeth.
Yeah, thanks, Stavros. Can you move on to the next slide, please? I hadn't. Well, I think I've made my comment, or I was clear enough on the fact that I don't see the need for these 3 paragraphs. But nevertheless, if the task force believe they should be kept, I do have a number of specific concerns on these actions that are proposed as well, and that's why I came back on record. The first one, I agree also what Caroline said. It also demonstrates my point on having an inquiring mind is implicit in the conceptual framework. But then the third one, I don't understand is when you're using technology to, well, basically, why is quick and frequently resolving a complex circumstance? That reference to why does it have to be quick and frequent, I'm puzzled with. And then on the last one, well, what does this mean? Appropriate monitoring. First of all, when is monitoring appropriate? But what kind of monitoring are we thinking about? This entire sentence actually, who is the they? So they may have made, and why is there a may? It's a permission under the structure. So I'm completely puzzled as to what this last bullet is trying to say. So I cannot even give you a suggestion on how to improve it. I really don't know what it means, especially because of the words being used in that sentence and given their meaning on the structure.
Okay, we will certainly look at that.
Okay. We have been at this over an hour, and I hear a lot of comments. I would just hope and ask members to be, not to over-explain, to be as brief as they can so that we can manage a bit better our time. So let's go on to the next, please.
This is 126A5.
Okay. Elizabeth, as briefly as you can, please.
Yeah, but it's a key point though that I want to make.
I know, but you know what I.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I will make my point. I won't go into the drafting details or anything, but it's really, this is fundamental to me. I have big issues with this particular paragraph here on technology in section 120. 120 is about the conceptual framework in all kinds of situations. So whenever the PA has to deal with an ethical issue, you have to apply the conceptual framework in order to get to the appropriate outcome from an ethical perspective. By bringing in this particular paragraph on technology and that overarching principle, we are polluting this section 120 completely. It's losing the direction it is given on that you have to apply section 120 anytime you're dealing with a fact and circumstance that can create a threat. It is not dealing just in instances of technology. I am not saying that we shouldn't be having references to technology in the code, absolutely not, but this is not the right spot where it should go. This should go into part 2, part 3, potentially in part 4 if it has to deal with independence. But this to me is fundamental, and I'm putting it on record. If this stays like this, I unfortunately will not be able to vote positive for in December. And then finally, and that is a structure point, it's facts and circumstances that create threats. Yes. It's not factors.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Other comments on this section, please?
Brian, you too, please be as brief as you can. Stay on the main points.
Yeah. I'm actually sympathetic here as well to Lisbeth's comment around geography. I'm not troubled by what's here. I might suggest that you look at, because it's most relevant to 220.7A2 in that area. So thinking about it from that perspective, and then the analog within the 300 series points back to the 220 area. So I think that might help. I hope it will help.
Good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Okay.
Let's go on, please.
Move on, please. This was 227A2.
Brian, do you have a comment on this paragraph? Okay. Your hand's still up. There are no hands for this.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on.
Move on, please. Leadership. 120.14A3. Any remarks, please, on this? Michael.
Thanks, Stavros. Sorry, I knew there'd be one I'd missed.
Michael, please also be brief.
Yeah.
Point.
It says demonstrate ethical behavior in dealings with business organizations. I'm not sure why it's business organizations. It's anybody that you have a professional business relationship with. That could be individuals.
Okay.
Yeah. Sadia.
So I've mentioned this offline as well, but this is a paragraph that was revamped under the role and mindset. So my understanding is that this paragraph isn't actually effective yet, and we are proposing another amendment to it. I'm just concerned about whether this is really necessary, especially since it's an application paragraph, and that it's going to be changing into this, not once, but twice in 2 years' time. Thank you.
Thank you for that point. Lisbeth.
Yeah, I sympathize completely with Sadia's comment, but in addition to that, when you read it, demonstrating ethical behavior when an accountant is having a professional relationship with a business organization, I guess that's client or the employing organization, isn't that what the code is about? So I really don't see what this is trying to say.
I may comment on that. I think the view was this went beyond just your client or employee and organization's interactions. At least that was, I believe, the thinking that we had put on the table.
But still, I think Lisbeth has a point. It's not that clear here.
Okay.
So you have to take it back.
Right. Appreciate that. Okay, let's move to the next one.
Next one.
Next section, keep moving forward here. So this is part 4A, changes in independent standards. Please move to the next slide. This is a summary of what we've attempted to propose here. Some guidance on when technology might increase the risk of assuming management responsibility, addressing sale and licensing of technology in section 520, making some adjustments to the NAS provisions related to technology, clarifying routine and mechanical, clarifying the examples of IT services that might create a self-review threat, and prohibiting hosting. Let's move to quickly, and I'll pause at the end of each slide. Next slide, please. Slides seem to be stuck. Okay, so 414A1, this is simply acknowledging the use of technology could cause you to assume management responsibility, and just reminds you that when you're using technology, you should consider 413, 414. Open for comments on this paragraph.
No comments. Oh, yes. Lisbeth.
Lisbeth, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Lisbeth.
Apologies for that. I have a problem with the construct of the sentence. It makes it reads like it's only in the situation of technology that you have to look at the management responsibility provisions, and I think it has to do with the fact of the regardless of the extent. So I think it should rather say even when providing technology while performing a professional activity or whatever it needs to be, these requirements apply. Now it's the regardless to gives the impression that it's only under those circumstances that these paragraphs apply.
Okay, thank you. Other comments on this?
I see no other.
All right, let's move forward, please. So this was the change. 523A2 has currently in the extant code 3 examples of close business relationships. The proposal here, and I think we were cutting off the bottom of it on the slide, but there we go, is that we've slightly modified the third proposal to include the concept of cells, distributes, or markets, and then add a fourth example of a close relationship as seen here, and that's designed to address the issues around sale and licensing technology. Comments on this section?
I don't see any. Deanne, do you?
No,
right.
last call, and
Let's move forward. We can certainly.
Yep.
This is fairly straightforward. This was something that, as you recall, came up in our outreach and in the survey where there seemed to be some parties who indicated that they didn't believe you had to think about the permissibility of and the NAS provisions if technology was being used. I'm summarizing that at a high level, and this is simply, these points are just to address that when technology is involved, you do need to think about the application of section 600, even if you're and in section 600, you need to, whether you use technology a little or a lot, you still have to consider all of the other NAS provisions there. So pause on that.
I don't recognize.
Who's that?
Oh, this is Sunam. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, on this paragraph, 520.7, the third row, shouldn't it be the form and network, the form or network form?
Yes, yes, thank you. Good point.
Lisbeth?
My point is on 600.6, and more specifically its location. So in those introduction paragraphs, it's more general about non-assurance services, applying the conceptual framework, prohibiting the firm from providing certain services, etc., etc. But then the last paragraph says now suddenly, well, the requirements in the application material in this section apply when. So it sounds like the NAS provisions only apply in the situation of technology because of its location. And then secondly, I'm okay with A, but I am having a problem with how B is described. So an audit client uses technology that has been sold or licensed, well, to it is not structured, but anyway, or licensed by the firm or a network firm to the client. Isn't the problem or the real point the fact that the firm or the network firm has developed or designed that software, so that basically what that software is being doing is attributable to the firm instead of it being seen by some as operating independently and so not a non-assurance service. If it is actually including also software designed by third parties and not as part of a professional service, because then it would fall under A, in my opinion. But if it's just a pure licensing of a software from a third party, I would call that a reseller arrangement, and that would then fall under business relationships, section 520.
Yeah, I understand your comment. We will take a look at that.
Sunam,
Sunam,
you
Oh,
have it?
yes. Can I go on?
Yeah.
Okay, on paragraph 600.6a, I'm not sure I clearly understand. Currently, it says a requirements apply when a firm or net firm uses technology. Technology, the term is not qualified or limited to certain technology, so it's very broad. So I'm wondering, the technology could include anyone, anything that has been developed and used by third party, non-audit client. So my concern is technology, the term is too broad and may mislead users.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Rich, I see no
Yeah,
more.
let's move on to the next one.
Okay.
So this is routine and mechanical. As I mentioned, it was addressed, material was addressed in NAS, and we've added 601 A5A2. I would point out that this editorial only will effectively apply to non-PIs, since the NAS banned this activity under the might result in a self-review threat. And happy to take comments on this.
601.582.
0.582, yes.
Sungnam?
Oh, no. I take it down.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good change you made here. The only suggestion I'm having, and it's not on the slide here because you didn't make a change so far yet, is in the 601.5A3, the examples of services that might be regarded as routine or mechanical. They were, of course, all written previously based on the assumption that everything was done manually. So I would like to ask the task force if they can bring in the concept of automated in those examples, or perhaps add additional examples.
Okay, appreciate that.
Okay. I don't see another.
No more hands. I think we can move on.
Okay, move to the next one, please. Next slide, please. So this gets into 606. The first part of this is essentially describing the range of IT services, what is within the scope, I guess, so to speak, of 606. I'm pause there and take comments on 606.2A1.
606.2A1, yes. I don't see any.
Okay.
Elizabeth.
Oh, Elizabeth, sorry.
Yeah, and I know we're trying to describe the IT system services, but concern I'm having is with just adding all these terms, will practitioners actually really understand what each of these terms mean? I'm an independence person. I'm dealing a lot with questions from consultants on, can we install this? Can we customize? Can we interface? And I always have to ask them, so what exactly do you mean? So I'm a little bit hesitant here by having all these terms without any further guidance to the practitioner of what they actually mean. Am I saying that this should go into the code? Probably not. No, I guess this might be a good topic for non-authoritative material, but it concerns me because I'm pretty sure that the average practitioner, I'm not underestimating them, absolutely not. But given my own experience, yeah, this might be confusing people. And is this a complete list of everything? We might have other terms as well. So a practitioner could ask themselves, well, why is it managing hosting and not just hosting itself? Yeah, I'm a little bit afraid of having all these additions just like that without any further reference somewhere further on in the prohibitions or in the application material or in non-authoritative material. That is fine with me, but the way it is now, I don't think is good enough.
All right, appreciate that.
Sungnam.
Okay, I have one question on the second bullet point. It says implementing includes installing, configuring, interfacing, and customizing. So this is the new, I believe, think like definition. So are you supposed to propose the meaning of implementation includes all these 4 elements through this code?
If I understand the question, I think the point is those are all elements of implementing, and any one of those would be it would be a service that the scope of 606 applies to.
Okay, and I may have a next question later.
Okay. Other comments here?
So now, if you don't mind putting your hand.
Oh yeah, I'll take it down. Thank you.
I don't
Go
see any others.
All right, why don't we move to the next slide, 606.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ken's coming in.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. And sorry, I'm a bit slow off the block. I'm just trying to react to what Lisbeth has raised, and it's a challenging question as to how far the board should go in elaborating on all these terms. You know, and one can argue that the terms should be read in the context of their general meaning. You know, I mean, designing, developing software. You know, these ought to have the meanings that one would attribute to them in the manner of general speaking, and how one ought to interpret those terms really ought to have regard to the context, to the particular context. You know, which type of hardware, you know, what software is being developed, for example. You know, there's some elaboration on the concept of implementing in this second bullet. You know, when the application material speaks to installing, configuring, interfacing, etc. Again, operating, you know, third bullet, operating, maintaining, and collecting and storing data. You know, I mean, one can argue that the application material should be read in a general sense, and how one should actually apply or understand the precise meaning that ought to be attributed to those bullets really has to take into consideration the specific facts and circumstances. So you know, I'm struggling a bit as to how the task force will be able to elaborate on these without coming up with a separate publication on each of them. And I don't think that's what the code should be dealing with. I mean, if there is a need for additional explanation, maybe that's off-code guidance. Maybe that's you know, that's some material that could be commissioned, you know, working with another party. But that's, you know, I'm just kind of struggling, you know, again, in the context of the code being a principles-based code, you know, how much detail we should be providing to PAs and firms to be able to apply the code as intended.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ken.
Caroline.
Caroline.
Yeah, I agree with Ken, but in the event that this remains on the second bullet, and trying to be responsive to Sungnam's comment, you know, if we say installing, configuring, interfacing, customizing, or other ways of implementing IT systems, that might work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Caroline.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, be brief, please.
Yeah, I will be brief, but I would like to react to what Ken was saying. I have an issue with just listing all these terms. What if you miss one? Does that have an impact on how you apply the rest of the provisions? Is also a concern I'm having. So.
Okay. Can we move to the next section, because I think there's potentially some things there that might make some of this less critical. We have 603A1 and A2 is hosting. And I guess I just open it up for essentially this would prohibit hosting and hosting related activities. Comments, please.
So it's 606.3A1 and A2.
No hands yet. Okay, so, oh, Elizabeth and Laurie.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, I find this 3A1, and it's an example only, so that's another concern actually having. It is not really clearly describing what is the issue around hosting data, and the link with assuming a management responsibility, or a potential link with assuming a management responsibility. And I think where the confusion may come from is in the SEC rules, hosting is defined as being performing a management function, whereas the big difference with IESBA is that assuming a management responsibility is about taking responsibility for certain activities. And so with this particular example here, I don't really get the link with the way it's described now with what is the problem under the management responsibility paragraph. And where I can, so the pure hosting of data, just having data on your server in itself without doing anything, the client is doing it for you. You're actually not taking, you're not assuming any management responsibility under the code. So I don't see why that would be ever a problem. Where I can see issues coming in is when you actually start doing services around that hosting of that data, like maintaining it, updating the systems to host that data, securing the systems around that. So, and really taking responsibility for that. So making it an outsourced, a managed service. Then I agree it would step into the prohibition around taking responsibility for design and implementation and monitoring and maintaining of internal controls, which is an actual example of the prohibition around management responsibility. So that concept, the way it's written now, doesn't come out of this particular example. And regarding A2, I don't have any issue because that was basically what I suggested last time as well.
Laurie?
So I actually am not going to go on. I think Elizabeth really actually said much better than I could what my concern was about A1. It's not immediately clear or explicit how we're getting there for the reasons Elizabeth laid out. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Laurie. And Yao Shu.
Thank you. My question is about the A2, and I'm not clear the meaning of permissible service to that client, because I see that in section 900 and the same place that that use the word assurance engagement, but here we use a permissible service. I'm not very clear about what is a permissible service here. Thank you.
I also see Brian. Brian?
Brian, Mike, and yeah, Brian and Mike.
As briefly as you can, please. I'm about to call for a break, so be sharp.
So with respect to 606.3A1, I'd like to suggest that the task force consider the situation where a firm has either arranged for a client to use a third-party service, a hosting provider, or where the firm itself uses a third party for storing or hosting, let's say, client data. And so therefore, the client is not, as it currently says, would not be accessing the information through the firm or network firm, but rather through a third party, but that situation or the arrangement is based on what the firm is actually controlling, if that makes sense. Happy to clarify offline if needed.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, and somebody in some feedback I received written had a question about the use of the phrase. I think it was direct or indirect. The point is whether if you're responsible for either hosting the data or have arranged for somebody else to host it via where you've agreed to do it, but you pick up somebody's cloud service to do it. Either one of those is the intent, is that would be prohibited.
Okay,
but we can certainly look at. I appreciate you asking that, Brian, because I wanted to get that out on the table because I had seen that in a written comment. We can work on clarifying that.
That'd be great. And just very quickly, it's because it right now says accessible rather than the arrangement component that you just mentioned. Thanks.
And Michael Ashley.
I'll be very quick, Stavros. Just to push back slightly on what I thought I heard Laura and Elizabeth saying, which is hosting's okay. I think inevitably in this day and age, if you are undertaking hosting and you are in effect running the client's data, you are providing a resilience service, and resilience is key. So I think personally that is something that my personal view is I would prohibit it.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. I don't see any other. Do you, Deanne?
No, seems
okay.
Like we have all the feedback on
Let's
hosting.
Let's move to the next slide. I'm sorry, Stavros, do you want to take the break now?
I would like to take a break now.
Okay.
Coming back at 10:45 Eastern time. So let's take a break now. Give everybody a rest and rethink. Okay.
Thank you.
45 minutes after the hour, please. Thank you. Okay, we are back from break. Rich, can we go back to the slides? Okay. Thank you. So Rich, 606.4A2, you have something to?
Yeah, let me comment here. It's the extant code contains a section in 606 that describes certain services that do not usually create a threat. And the third of those is the off-the-shelf accounting or financial information reporting software involved that was not developed by the firm or network if the customization required to meet the client's need is not significant. This proposal removes that from the list of items that are described as not usually creating a threat. And essentially for non-PIs puts it into a position where you need to apply the conceptual framework and assess the threats and safeguards. For PIs, I think the NAS provisions already addressed the fact that it would be might create a self-review threat effectively and therefore not be permitted. But that is what this change is about. I'll pause and take comments on that.
Okay. Any comments, please? See Brian?
Thanks. Yeah, so just with respect to the rewrite, and it's really between A1 and A2, and I know A1's not on the screen, but they seem to provide now, to me, contradictory messages. A1 states, providing IT system services, so the same opening, to an audit client might create a self-review threat, but then 606A2 starts with providing IT system services to an audit client does not usually create a threat as long as, which suggests that it's not usually a problem in a variety of circumstances. But I'd recommend, because they have the same start, if they sound contradictory, might create and then doesn't usually create, consider starting A2 with the specific elements of IT system services that don't usually. So for example, designing or implementing IT systems that blah, blah, blah does not usually create a threat. Because most of what's now in, going back to 606.2A1, most of what's in there under the broad category of providing IT system services likely will create a threat. So things like customizing, operating, maintaining, hosting data, as we just talked about. So we're left with this situation where the beginning of 606.4A2 right now, I think, is misleading. I'll give you a really quick analogy. If I tell you that you don't normally need to carry an umbrella in Vancouver unless it's likely to rain, that sounds reasonable. But given that rain is a frequent occurrence in Vancouver, then that stem of you don't normally need to carry an umbrella in Vancouver is misleading. And right now I think it's equally misleading. Providing IT system services does not usually. The problem is a lot of those services do create a threat. Ultimately, I would even go further than that. Given the exponential pace of change and a lot of the truly disruptive technologies that we're talking about, it seems risky to me to include that does not usually create a threat construct at all here, because I think it risks getting out of date and then needing to revisit this as things change. Thanks.
Yeah, if I could comment on that, it's an interesting observation. That I would note that the first part, the paragraph at the top of this slide, with the exception of the deletion of the words "the following," is from the extant code, I guess we were trying to make, once we took C out, the entire what was A, B, and C can now be rolled into one paragraph, which you see here. But we can take a look at that observation. I'd be curious if others have similar viewpoints or on this. Thank you.
Okay.
So, other comments?
Kim Gibson.
Thank you. Actually, just on that point that Brian made, I wasn't really focused on that. I think that is a really good point to take a look at the wording there and the thought process behind it. You know, Rich, in the NAS project, we spent time on C specifically and thought that it was important to leave it in with the qualifier of not significant. So I just wanted to point that out, that we did make some changes to C with the NAS project. So seeing it almost be turned around is just, I guess I wasn't really expecting that we would be seeing it become something that does create a threat, as opposed to where we left it with the NAS project. So I just wanted just to highlight that, considering that the NAS just really came out. Okay, thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Kim. Rich, you have a comment or you want to go on?
Well, yeah, I mean, we weren't, apologize, we weren't intending to trample on NAS. I mean, we'll certainly look at that. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I thought where we were leaving it was simply that says there's a threat. For non-PIs, you need to evaluate whether you can identify safeguards sufficient to overcome that threat or reduce it to an acceptable level. And as such, as you'll see a little later on, or maybe we won't look at it, but if you look at the 7B, the markup to extent, the safeguard that is there is left there currently. So that would apply to IT services for the non-PIs. But we can certainly take a look at that point, maybe go back and look at the background from the NAS project.
Thank you, Rich. Lisbeth, you have a point on this paragraph?
Indirectly, yes. So I understand what the task force is trying to get to. So the fact that if it's off-the-shelf software, that then it's confirmed that you cannot have a threat. And I agree with that observation. That is probably not 100% correct. But I'm still struggling with, and that comes back to the not significant point as well that Kim somehow was hinting to. I think before we make this very straightforward deletion here and have it somewhere else in the grouping of might create a threat, I think we need to step back and reflect a little bit on whether all of these instances actually will lead to potential threats, yes or no. And probably it has to do with that the language in 606.4a.4 that I'm a little bit puzzled. But the pure installation of a very simple bookkeeping software, so just putting it on the server of a client, I don't see how that would create a threat if you don't do anything further apart from installing and configuring it. On the other hand, when you're gonna start customizing or making connections with other systems and setting up specific reports and whatever, then I feel some sympathy for the fact that there might be a risk for self-review threat. So I think instead of scrapping it here and putting it somewhere else, I think the task force will need to reflect a little bit more on what exactly would create or could create a self-review threat, and then make sure that the appropriate language is being used. And that comes back to my initial point, like all these different terms, what exactly do they mean? Thanks.
I guess for reasons that deal with circumstances, I think that existed when the section of the extant code was addressed, with the exception of the NAS piece, there was apparently a view that this was more common, but I would say we could not find much, if anything, out there that is truly off the shelf, where you just pull it down off the software provider's website and quote install it, including configuration, where increasingly configuration involves fairly sophisticated activities to fit the circumstance of the company. But even more fundamentally, I guess if there was a case where that's all you were doing for a non-Pi, but fundamentally, I'm personally, this is my personal view, I struggle with this concept that just because I'd installed it and configured it, it seems inconsistent with the role of the auditor in general, but particularly with regard to Pi clients. But we can take a look at that because I've heard it from 2 board members here, and I've seen some other written comments on it. Other comments on this section, please?
Lori.
I'm good. I think that covered my thought as well. I think we do need to look at this a little more closely. And Elizabeth said something that I think also, and applies to the discussion we'll have next on the next section, which is I think we do need to consider as we look at all these, what exactly is it that causes the self-review threat, and have some clarity around that.
Diane?
Thank you. I just wanted to react to Kim's, or maybe Kim's comment around NAS, and just remind the board that when we finalized the NAS project, C was retained, but it's important to remember that we received quite a few comments from respondents to the NAS exposure draft questioning whether C is truly an example of an IT system service that does not usually create a threat. And then when we explained that, you know, that it was important to think about the last bit, not significant, we got questions about what that term meant. And it was in that context that we thought, okay, we'll leave this and then it will be dealt with by the technology task force. So just wanted to remind the board here that there are questions around what's the meaning of the term is not significant in C. And the idea of delete in C isn't intended to, at least based on what I have observed in the task force discussions, it doesn't mean that it always creates a self-review threat. It simply means that it does not, like it doesn't not create a self-review threat, which are 2 different things as I understand it.
Thank you, Deanne, for the point. Brian.
Thanks, and just really a follow-on, I think, to what Deanne was just saying, which I agree with. When we think about off-the-shelf software, I totally agree at a large enterprise level, that's just not realistic anymore. But there are a lot of examples of small and medium practitioners who assist clients with off-the-shelf software to the extent of advising on the software, even installing the software and configuring the software. So not making any changes whatsoever to the code, but just helping with, you know, what does this chart of counts look like, things of that nature. And obviously that's happening in the non-Pi area, which is the predominance, I would suggest, of assurance engagements, even if they don't get the same spotlight as Pi engagements do. But it's when those services move into customization that we really get into that risky territory. And that's where I think the distinction should be drawn, is between configuration and customization. I think that's also when the NAS task force punted this issue over to the technology group. It was that issue that was being considered, and that gets back to what Deanne said around what is not significant. Not significant in our mind was around the customization, but it is significant when you get into, or sorry, the configuration is not significant and customization is the significant point.
And I see Sanjeev.
Yeah, thanks. Just to pick up on where Brian finished, I think the first point also to be looked at is whether the firm or the network firm is assuming a management responsibility in such cases. something which you're doing for a client where you're just installing it, doing something which is not significant. And I think the crux can be, or I think probably the task force can consider it, is it that the firm or the network firm assuming management responsibility? If it is not, then there is no question of any threat. And if it is, then obviously there is a threat. So I think that point also will be considered, please. Thank you.
Okay. So Rich, shall we go on? I see no further comments here.
Yeah, I have to be open here. I'm really not clear on the board's sense. I'm hearing both sides of this. The intent was solely to take it off a list that basically says you don't need to think about it anymore, and leave it there to be something to be evaluated using the conceptual framework and considering the fundamental principles as to whether it created threats that could not be safeguarded to an acceptable level. Because I think, at least for non-PIs, when you get to PIs, I think there's a view that it might create a self-review threat and therefore it would be prohibited. But we'll take this back to the task force and see if others had a better understanding of it. I don't think significant or not significant is the issue. And I really don't think in most cases we're not getting into customization, even in the SMP environment, but from a practical perspective. But why don't we move to the next slide?
Okay, so this
is a continuation, right? This is just a continuation of that, where it moves into 606 4A4 as an example of something that might create a self-review threat.
Okay.
And then perhaps we can move to 606 4A4.
Sunam.
Sunam.
Okay, on the previous slide.
Please go back. Please go back one slide.
A4, yeah, one slide before. Okay, here the first bullet point as a follow-up question about the four elements of implementation. We here mentioned only two, installation and customization. But while the other two pieces, such as configuration and interfacing, are excluded. So do you have any specific reason? That's my question.
No.
Okay.
We can
go ahead.
We can look at getting those to be conformed.
All right.
Sunam.
Thank you. On the next slide, please. This is not my comment or question, but just an observation. In consideration of our previous session by the external speaker, we heard a lot about information security services in relation to second bullet point. But here we use network security services. So I don't know, I cannot make a clear distinction of network security or information security. I don't know the technical nuance, but I'd like to put it under the table.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I see no other concerns here. Oh, I do. Lisbeth, on this?
Yeah, this particular paragraph, I don't have a lot of issues with that first bullet, and I understand how you get to a situation of a potential self-review threat, but the other ones, so 2, 3, and 4, when I see those, they're most of the time provided under the context of an outsourced service. You're performing the management of the system service for the system of a client, or you're performing business continuity services, or you're maintaining the network security for the client. So I was a little bit puzzled to see these examples in the context of just the potential of creating a self-review thread. I think the bigger risk with these kind of services is that you actually assume a management responsibility. So taking responsibility for design, implementation, monitoring, and maintaining internal controls of an audit client. And that's what I'm a little bit missing in this section 606. It's that issue around outsourced managed services or application management systems.
Thank you. That was not intended to be left out, so we can certainly address that.
Richard Fleck.
Elizabeth, just very briefly on this, if you look at the way the AICPA has dealt with it, they've dealt with it from a management responsibility perspective, and then just flat-footedly prohibited. The difficulty is that we haven't really wanted to go down and interfere with the management responsibility provisions, and therefore we've, in the way we've constructed it, we've reminded people of the management responsibility obligations, and then said, if you get yourself round the management responsibility issue by having appropriate overview, etc., within the client, just remember that you might still have a self-review threat. And that's what this paragraph is trying to, the balance this paragraph's trying to get. We'll think about it, but I just wanted to put that on the table so you could understand the thought process. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I have Laurie and Lisbeth after that. Laurie?
Yeah, so I had a similar concern, and just around the things that are included on this list. Richard's comment does help me a little bit in terms of linking how to think through this. But I do think some more thought around what's on this list, and I'm not going to be specific because I'm a little bit out of my depth here, but it is needed. But I do understand, and thank you, Richard, for clarifying.
And Elizabeth, you want to come back on this point?
Yeah, I just would like to react to what Richard was saying, and I understand the explanation, but you might achieve the opposite effect of this approach as well, because by having just this bit in reference to the self-review thread, readers actually may not think further and can realize that this is assuming a management responsibility potentially. So that's why I'm struggling with just having it under the self-review thread provision.
Okay. Back to you, Rich. I see no more on this. Questions, comments?
Mike Ashley has a comment.
Michael.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the right point, because I think you're going on to sort of section 900, Rich. So I did have a couple of comments on some other bits in 600 that you haven't explicitly covered off in the presentation.
Please, Mike, happy to hear that input.
Okay, 600.9A2.
Mm-hmm.
And forgive me while I just very quickly find that.
Can we see that some way?
I don't think we have that one on the slide, do we?
I don't think you have. It's basically where you've added in.
We added a bullet. We added a bullet that says, I'll read this, Mike, and then the 609A2 extant code has factors that are relevant in identifying the different threats that might be created by providing a non-assurance service to an audit client, and evaluating the level of such threats include And we added a bullet point that says the frequency with which the service might be provided using technology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's sort of just fitted in a technology reference, really, because none of the others is technology specific. And for me, it didn't quite do it in the sense of, if I thought carefully about this, it wasn't so much the frequency. If you've got a service which is entirely dependent on technology, does that really make a difference? It's more, if you like, how embedded that technology is within the context of the service and the client. It's not the frequency with which the task is repeated, I suppose. So I just ask you to think about whether there's a better way. It's more about how entrenched it is.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, I think what we were trying to address there was that there can be some services that, when performed once, maybe would not be inconsistent with the code. But if you were asked to start doing it every quarter, for example, does that start to make it look like you became part of the system of internal control, for example?
Yeah, but I don't think it's the use of technology.
Yeah, I understand. I understand.
That's my point. If you want a technology example, it didn't strike me as a good technology example.
Yep. Good point.
And then the other one was in R606.3, where you've beefed up what is now little b to talk about the client through a competent employee makes all the management decisions, the proper responsibility of management, etc., which I'm all in favor of. But little c just says the client evaluates. And I think, again, trying to build in the concept that it's a good evaluation, i.e. the client is doing a good job of evaluating it, not just playing lip service to evaluating the adequacy and results of the design and signing off on it. So in the same way as you built that into B, I'd encourage you to think about building it into C as well.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
That was me done.
Okay, so where are we now?
Well, I had, and I'm going to, Stavros, I don't have a slide on this, but as we went through all of this, I guess a question has come up at the task force that at the end of the day, when you get through this, I think the view was that we have essentially said that that services related to the IT services that are described in more detail in the proposal than the extant code has them, but essentially for pies would not be permitted. And much of the materials there is then considers for non-pies. There has been a question about whether we could simplify this entire section by simply just saying that any IT services related to IT systems that involve the financial statements, the accounting systems, or internal control over the financial statements are prohibited on the basis that the threats are such that they cannot be overcome with safeguards. And those aren't the exact words, but is there, I guess I'd like to ask for a viewpoint because that essentially is where this is getting us as it's currently been developed, but we seem to have lots of people wanting words defined and expanded and contracted. And frankly, at the end of the day, I wonder if that's a worthwhile exercise, given where you end up at the end of the day for a pie. Maybe it's still worthwhile for non-pies, but all of this is just trying to expand on what has previously been fairly succinct, higher level wording because of the fact that people say, well, I didn't develop, I just did X or Y. Well, that is part of development. So we try to put some words in. So it may not go away, but there was a suggestion that perhaps there's a way to deal with shortening some of these paragraphs and eliminating them as a way of where we get to the same point. So I'll pause there.
Okay, Michael, you have a hand raised? No.
Lisbeth.
Well, I thought I saw, I don't see Lisbeth. I thought I saw.
Oh, wait, Lisbeth's hand went down. All I see is Galen now. Sorry. Sorry, Lisbeth.
Galen, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard. And you know, while we didn't specifically address the suggestion that you just had made, or the idea, I'm not saying that you suggested it, but put it on the table. I think that the CAG would support that approach. I mean, one of the things that I've seen in practice over the years is a situation where people try to really parse these words to get around, you know, things that are not defined, and to find a way to provide a service. And is if you clarify that for pies, I think the risk of that happening going forward to the public would be significantly decreased. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. Rich?
Okay, I didn't. And
Actually,
sorry, are there any other hands up? I can't see the.
no, we don't have any other.
Okay. All right. Well, if you have thoughts on that you want to express to the committee task force, please do so and send us messages also. If we can move forward now to part 4B, and I would preface the remarks here with the intent of what the task force was dealing with here was trying to take the matters that we had addressed in part 4A that were appropriate to bring forward to part 4B, in particular with the focus trying to be on simply saying, if you're going to perform assurance services and apply attestation or other using under the services under the assurance standards, that you should not have involvement with matters associated with the creation development of the subject matter, which is the principle that's already in there, and we tried to bring in that includes the technology underlying that. I believe that we may hear some comments here that perhaps our wording has gotten too broad in a couple of places, and so please elaborate on those, because I've seen some of that in writing. It was not our intent to go too broadly. So let me start with 900, and we did bring in, there was a lot of feedback throughout the outreach and in the survey, and some very helpful feedback to make it clear that this expands, considers non-financial information, and we've specifically used the example of environmental sustainability, but left what was in the extant code, which was solely the greenhouse gas statement piece. I will pause there and seek any input on this section. Okay. Then we might move to.
Oh, I see.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I see Elizabeth's hand.
Yeah, so just on this paragraph, you want some reaction, or to the self-review threats?
This one right here for now.
This one here, okay. Let me just explain why it's just referring to assurance on an entity's greenhouse gas statement. When we redrafted part 4B, we basically took the ISAEs that are within the IAASB's documents, and we listed them in here. Am I saying that this is wrong? No, but I'm just explaining why we didn't specifically refer to ESG or whatever other terms you can use. So this is just the title of that specific ISAE on greenhouse gas.
Yeah.
That's the reason why.
And I can't. We do propose to keep that in there, but I think we're hoping that it points out that there's a growing, we're trying to get out in front of this growing, what seems to be a growing swell of call for reporting on non-financial information and reporting on ESG type information also. So we didn't really want to delete anything. That's why I will admit it it has a little, can be viewed as having a little awkwardness to the sentence, but we really didn't want to delete the greenhouse gas piece. So, all right, other comments on this? If not, we'll move to the next slide.
I think we have Galen, excuse me.
Just very quickly, is there a reason why you left out governance in that string of descriptors? Environmental sustainability?
I don't think so, Galen, although yeah, there's no reason to leave it out. We can get governance in.
Okay.
Caroline?
Rich, the normal terminology is environmental, social, and governance, ESG.
Okay, so it's a question of getting the terminology right over there. Thank you, Caroline. So Rich, can you go to the next one, please?
950, I think, is the next slide. This was simply to bring in this concept that one should not be providing assurance on information, or I'm sorry, there's a might create a self-review threat if you're providing assurance on information generated from IT systems that you have been involved with, either design, development, implementation, or operation at all.
Lisbeth?
Lisbeth, I think you're on mute.
Lisbeth, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I have a problem with my mute button apparently. I have a question for Rich. This is the example you want to make why there is a self-review threat when using technology, right?
It's an example of where you might create a self-review threat, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, having been through this long Part 4B project, I'm actually struggling how this works under the ISA 3000 concept. So, and I'm asking the questions here because I might be misunderstanding it, but what is the subject matter in this sentence? And what is the subject matter information on which assurance is to be provided? So what is missing here is that measurement part. What are you as the practitioner measuring on which you then subsequently are providing assurance? So I was thinking further. So what kind of an example could you give on technology? Perhaps something around the effectiveness of internal controls around financial reporting, when the firm actually has been doing the design and implementation and the maintenance of the financial information technology system. That would create, in my opinion, a pure self-review threat in the context of an assurance engagement. So, and this sentence to me is not clear what is a subject matter, what is a subject matter information, and where is the issue from a self-review threat. But I'm not saying that we shouldn't be having a technology example, but the task force need to come up with a better one that fits within ICE 3000.
Yeah, perhaps perhaps someone could help me with what was the thinking of the board when it used that phrase subject matter in other parts of sections 900 in the extant code, because it's not defined, it's not designed to be specific.
It is.
I understand.
It is IESBA 3000. It's a defined term in the glossary now. Subject matter and subject matter information. It is. And then also a minor point, network firm.
I'm not asking about ISAE 3000. I'm talking about the IESBA code. We've used it in here without.
Part 4B is applying ethical principles when you are providing assurance, or complying with independence when you are providing an assurance report. And an assurance report is under the principles of ISAE 3000. Look to the definition in the glossary and it will take you there. Yeah, I'm feeling very strongly
I don't know how we could,
having
I don't know
words
how,
so long.
you're suggesting that we need to define every circumstance of what might be a
No,
subject
no,
matter?
I'm just telling you that in this example, it's unclear what is the subject matter, what is the subject matter information, and where is the issue of the self-review threat. So where is the measurement and where is the practitioner providing assurance on that subject matter information. And whereas when you look at the other examples, there's always a clear link between the practitioner performing the measurement to get to the subject matter information and then providing assurance on it. This one doesn't explain it at all. So I don't see how the self-review threat
we need to, what you're saying is we need to conform to how it's been described in the other examples.
Correct. Yeah, and so that's why I'm giving as a suggestion, perhaps the effectiveness of the internal controls. That would be when you make that effective, when you measure that effectiveness yourself first, and then you provide assurance on it. That's a pure example of a self-review.
Lisbeth, please, your point has been made, I understand. Don't belabor the points because we are a bit short of time. And let's make the process more effective, please. And this goes for everybody. Sung Nam. Sung Nam?
Yes, I thought Elizabeth will make a comment. At the end of the paragraph 3, I don't think we need network form. On assurance engagement, the all clauses were just limited to the form, excluding network form.
Okay, thank you. Understand.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Other comments, other hands up?
I don't see any.
Okay. So the next slide, unfortunately, we do not have the text on slides, but addresses the other changes that we have in the section of 900. It includes the prohibition on hosting for the same reasons we put it in Part 4A. It includes the reminder that provision of management responsibility applies regardless of technology used, which is 900.14A1, which is equivalent to the edit we made to 414A1, I believe it was. We included the example of the sale and licensing of close business relation of licensing of software as a close business relationship in 920. And referenced that business relationships and the need to consider business relationships and technology in 926 and 950. That's similar to the paragraphs in 520 and in 600.6 that were in Part 4A. I'm open to having comment on any of these or any other part of Section 900.
Okay.
I see Sunam's hand still up in Lisbeth.
Okay, Lisbeth?
I'm struggling with why we are having that example of hosting here. And I want to step back again and think about how Part 4B is written. It would only be an issue if your non-assurance service or assuming a management responsibility would actually touch on, is in relation to the underlying subject matter or subject matter information that it would create an issue. So I find it a little bit odd that we are having this as an example here.
You're saying it's too broad, Lisbeth?
Well, it's misplaced. Let me say it that way. Because of 955A1, it says it's only when assuming a management responsibility in relation to the underlying subject matter and in an attestation engagement to subject matter information that would create an issue with assuming a management responsibility. So then this example basically is saying that, or is trying to say that you're providing an assurance report on it. I don't understand what it is doing in Part 4B. Although, yeah, that's the point that I'm trying to make. It doesn't belong here. Let me say it that way.
Well, I think I appreciate we need to clarify, and we can look at that. We were simply, I think, again, trying to address that you should not be providing hosting services for a topic on which you're providing an assurance attestation. That was the principle that I think that we were trying to apply. But I understand your point. Other comments?
See a comment from Elizabeth again.
Yeah, it relates to A5 then. It's similarly, in Part 4A, it is about providing a non-assurance services engagement and then obtaining data. But why is it here linked to an assurance engagement and not to NAS? That's my question.
Okay.
But well, as you heard previously, I don't think A4 is needed there either. So I think this is redundant in Part 4B.
Yeah, you have a problem with both of these, I see. Okay. Anyone else, please have a comment? I don't see any. Deanne, do you see someone?
No comments, no virtual hands at this time.
Well, Stavros, I'm just going to wrap up here real quick.
Okay.
We still are working towards an exposure draft in December. Obviously need to incorporate all of the helpful comments made here today. I appreciate the time spent. I also appreciate very much those of you, including some who have commented verbally, but who've also been kind enough to provide some of it in writing. If there are other comments, or large or small, that people have that we didn't talk about live today, please don't hesitate to send them to us, any of us on the task force, or to Cam. We do have some additional scheduled outreach that is listed on the slide. It's slide 37 in your package. I realize it's not on the screen. That includes IOSCO Form of Firms, IFAC's SMP AG, and IESBA's National Standard Setter Liaison Group. We have not listed some others that we are reaching out to again try to widen the spectrum of where we've gotten feedback from, or where we get feedback from, and we will continue to do so. I would also expect that we would turn some versions of this document around before we even post for additional feedback, to trying to show how we responded to comments here, as well as comments we've received from the CAG, and turn something around for board consideration electronically and feedback prior to getting a posting for the December meeting, just to be as comprehensive as possible. So with that, Stavros, I have no further comments.
Thank you very much, Rich. I especially appreciate the last point you made, because you have heard quite a number of comments that I believe are quite helpful, at least to reflect about. So it would be very much appreciated if we could have a turnaround draft before we go to the final board meeting, so that we can reflect on those and become more prepared. Thank you, and I really want to thank you all. This has been a very rich discussion to which many of you contributed, and I have taken notes of considerable comments and detailed views. So thank you. I would like, before I close the session, to ask.
We're closing much faster than we were much earlier than we were originally scheduled. Our next session, I just want to let you know, Stavros, is an external presenter, Michelle Birdie, I don't see her online yet, but I just want to let you know that we are trying to inform her that we're running a bit early.
I'm sorry, I misread the time. I see. Okay. I then have to apologize to people for pushing them for time, because I really was thinking that we were going beyond. Anyway, before we close the session, I would like to ask Robert, our PIOB observer, to make a comment. Robert?
Thank you, Chair, and good day to everyone. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have watched the progress in this area over the last 2 board meetings now. Really want to commend the board for the discussion today, as the Chair has just done. From an observer's perspective, and I'm sure I speak for other observers here too, the depth of this discussion just confirms the inherent complexity of the topic. And of course, it is inherently complex. The challenges are about developing a code response to the needs that have been identified, and Rich referred right at the outset of the presentation to the very extensive outreach that has preceded all of this. It seems that it's all about translating those needs that have been identified into additional material in the code, which still respects the generic nature of the code and its structural integrity, and I guess also about being clear and explicit, but not overly detailed. And of course, as we all know, not freezing the code at a particular point in technological time. So very difficult balances, and clearly the task force and then the board today have been grappling with those. Project is very clearly in the public interest. Wherever the task force and the board land on the wording that's been discussed today, it's going to be debated further on exposure. So it's very valuable to do the hard work at this stage and get the wording right, I guess. So it's been a very good discussion to observe. Thanks very much. And the debate about the independence questions has also been fascinating and commendable in public interest terms. And it's good to see the progress in the thinking around some of the issues that have been discussed in depth today, like the hosting and understanding the actual nature of the types of services that are involved here. Same balances seem to apply, don't they, in relation to the generic NAS provisions, and I was interested in the discussion around ensuring that relationship is right, and you're taking good care about that as well. So I'm sure the ultimate proposal, as it emerges, will be responsive to the public interest and launch an interesting due process. It's good to see that there's going to be a CAG discussion and some just outreach with the regulatory community before you finalise, and that's very positive as well. So thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to listen and to make these brief comments on record. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you, Rich, and thank you to all the contributors for this, and the task force, of course, staff. This has been, I believe, a very comprehensive and good discussion. We do have a presentation on the eCode, which was scheduled for later than I thought, and I apologize. Can you please ask if the presenter could come with us earlier?
Presenters, she's online. Michelle. Michelle Birdie.
There you are. Okay, so we can proceed with that presentation. Michelle, welcome. It's very good to see you. And I think you're bringing some good news to us that we're very interested in. So please take the floor.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction. So I think some of you may remember me from some previous presentations we did. It seems like a long time now. At that point, we were just in design phase, and I'm really excited to be able to share the eCode 2.0 with you all. I did a presentation earlier today for the IESBA, and they were really excited. So I hope that translates through to the IESBA as well. So today, the presentation largely will just take the place of a live demonstration of the platform. We thought it was important for the boards, and in particular IESBA. I know that the IESBA has been quite anxious about seeing the 2.0 version of the eCode, but we thought it would be important to share this with the board prior to launching the product, so that you can sort of lionize the product and champion the product to your colleagues and constituents. Just to preface this before we kind of dive in, I think I mentioned at the last board meeting that I was able to speak at that this is a phased approach. So it's constantly evolving, and even now, as I'll go through, there are some changes that are being made based on feedback that we've received, but this is phase one. So what we really wanted to do was to make sure that it had all of the same functionality as eCode 1.0, hopefully improving on some of that. But after we launch, we of course welcome your responses because that will really form the basis of the next phase and how we choose to prioritize new features going forward. This is really a platform that's hopefully going to make interacting with the standards and all the great resources that have been created easier. And so anything that will make your lives easier or you think can be improved, or new features you want to see, we're more than interested to hear what those are. Obviously, this has been a big lift, sort of starting from scratch again and incorporating all of the standards. And I do just want to give a big thank you to Deanne, who has really just been integral in this project and really championing the IESBA point of view and making sure what we're developing is in line with expectations of the IESBA board. So I wanted to give a shout out in that regard. So again, I'll start the demonstration now. I'll share my screen, and as a reminder, this is ever evolving, and I'll actually highlight a few areas where there might be some changes just in the next few days. So can everyone see my screen okay? Yes, I'm gonna assume yes. I can only see a few people on my sidebar, but if you can't see it, give me a shout. Okay, so this is the main kind of entry point into the standards. The overall publication is called the overall platform is called the Electronic International Standards, or EIS. You can see we sort of repurposed the eCode savicon for the EIS, but the eCode will of course also have its own. And this is sort of the entry point for all three sets of standards. So IESBA eCode, we've retained that brand because we know that brand value has been built up in it. And you can also access the other two sets of standards. One important thing to note is that on the SSB specific websites, you'll be able to have a link directly into the particular set of standards. So on the IESBA site, it will link directly into the IESBA set of standards, so people can easily access it from there, but also know that they can also change between all three sets of standards. And they can also do that once you enter. A quick note, you'll note that I'm already signed in, but this does require a login. There will be sort of a one-time acknowledgement that you're following the appropriate IFAC policies when interacting with the platform. And subsequent to that, you'll be signed in and you won't need to go through that again. So now to get into the actual standards. So when you go in, you land on this page. And I'd like to break this up into sort of the three sections that we really focused on when developing the platform. The first is navigation. The second is resource and reference. And the third is search. Prior to getting into that, I just wanted to point out a few sort of accessibility items or kind of little fun things that we've added in to hopefully make interacting with the standards a little bit easier. So if you're somebody who likes to focus on the content of the text and you don't want the navigation panel or the resource panel, you can simply enter Zen mode, which will slide the panels away. And then you can just focus on the text. And to bring it back, you simply exit Zen mode and the panels will reappear. Equally, if you prefer to use the table of contents to navigate, you can also just close the panel on the right, and that will leave you with the text as well as the table of contents. And finally, if you're somebody like me and wears glasses and need the text to be a little bit larger, you can increase the font size. So it'll be a little bit larger and a little bit more legible. And equally, you can decrease the font size by doing the same. So in terms of navigation then, it is relatively self-explanatory, but we did want to make the code easily navigable.
Michelle, I think we see your window for your meeting notice.
Oh, I don't even have
Oh, no,
that.
sorry. I apologize. That was mine.
Okay, no worries. I was like, mine went away. I don't see it. Okay. So we wanted to make this very easily navigable in a few different ways. At the moment, we have it split up into parts in accordance with the actual handbook. And the way that you go through it is quite simple. So you go into part 1, and then you can enter into the relevant sections. And you can either choose to click through or scroll, whatever is more convenient for you. And if you need to get back to the top of the page, you can simply scroll back to the top. Equally, if you'd like to reference something later on or send something to a colleague, you'll notice that there is a share icon next to every paragraph within the set of standards. So all you need to do is click on this, and an email will pop up that has a link directly to that section. So not just the eCode, but directly to that section. And you can email it to yourself, to a colleague, whatever you prefer. One small note about this, and this will be included in the FAQs because I know we came across this a little bit in beta testing, is in order for this to pop up with the relevant email that you want, you just need to make sure that within your own computer settings, your work email or your email preference of choice is set as the default email. So that's something that, is more of an individual issue, but we'll put on there just to make sure people are aware that's how you get, Outlook or whatever your preferred email provider is. And lastly, you can also navigate between the standards here. One of the things that we found in the survey that we sent out quite early on, and I think I touched upon at the previous board meeting, was that we had a lot of respondents who used more than one set of standards. So they wanted to be able to easily access all of them. So you're able to do that here. And then the last piece is the versioning feature, which I know everyone is really curious about. The versioning feature will work through here. So you'll be able to choose a different year to access a future version of the standards. At the moment, we're finalizing formatting the 2021 handbook. We should have that back by the end of this week, and then it needs to be formatted for ingestion. So that feature will be live before we launch, but we do need to just lost my train of thought. We do need to make sure the formatting is correct for ingestion. We uploaded a preliminary version of the handbook just to make sure it's working and that the versioning feature is functioning properly, and it is, but that's in the development site. So because I'm actually in the live platform, I'm unable to show you. Although again, I'm happy to let everybody play around with that.
Třeba může být taková?
I'd be,
To je akurát permanent, tak možná ne. Najděme Číně permanentní.
I think Marta has her, oh, there we go. So once that feature is live, I'm happy to obviously have everyone play around with it to make sure it's appropriate before we go live. So that's largely the navigation component. The next part of this is the resource and reference. So you can see on the right panel here, we have definitions and resources. The definitions tab just has a glossary of terms that are accessible to you at any time that you'd like. So you can go through and open and reference as you need, but equally, they're available in line with the text. So anywhere where you see sort of a highlighted term, you can click on the term and that definition will pop up. So 2 ways to access the definitions. We figured why not have them both depending on user preference. And then the other feature within the actual text of the code is also the reference and the hyperlinking. So let me just get to the area where I noted down, we should have it. Okay, so you'll see here we have hyperlinks. This is perhaps not the best example because it's hyperlinking back up to this paragraph, but what we wanted to do was to allow people to reference content side by side where it might not be kind of next to one another. So we developed this great modal that pops up, and the really neat thing about this is that it's movable. So you can put that wherever you need in order to make it legible. You can put it over the table of contents. If you like to read it, above and below, you can do so. You can also change the size. So if there's a lot of material, you can expand to make sure that you can see everything. or equally, if it's a small amount of material and you just want it to take up a small amount of space, you can minimize it. And then to exit, you would simply close. The next piece that's really great and that I sometimes have to reload to get to is the resources. So the resources have been divided into two sections. I'll highlight here that we do have the warning that resources are non-authoritative and should not be used in the place of the standard, because we want to make sure people know that. But what we really wanted to focus on here is ensuring that all of the great resources that have been created are easily accessible and referenced to a specific part of the code. So we have general resources and specific resources. General resources are auto-closed just because at some point, once you've seen it once and you don't want it, you might not want it to pop up all the time. But here it's really the resources that the board has decided are relevant no matter where you are in the code. So if you want to look at the building blocks, for example, to see how the code is structured, that resource is always available to you. Conversely, we also have specific resources. So these are resources that are specific to a specific section of the code. You'll note that it will note where it's relevant to. So for example, here it's R200.5 and R210.8 A1. And there are three kind of forms of resources you can have. So one is PDF. So when you click on it, it opens straight into the PDF. So you have that available for easy reference. We also have links. So it can go to the link. So here's a nice video with Chairman Stavros for our viewing pleasure. And we can actually also embed videos within the resources. So if we have the actual video file, you can simply click on the video and see it within here without even having to go to YouTube. So this is a really nice feature just because one of the things we found and we got a lot of feedback on, and particularly positive feedback, was that people liked the fact that you can have the resources near the standards and you don't really need to go kind of fishing to see what's relevant to what section. So that's largely the resources. And then the final component that we get to is search. So to access search, you simply click on the search button and a new window will pop up. If you decide you don't want to search, you can easily just click the X and it'll take you back to where you were. Search is one of the areas where I did want to point out that we are actually amending some things as we speak. Some of you participated in the beta testing that went out a couple of weeks ago, and thank you for doing that. That feedback was incredibly useful. And a large amount of the feedback actually focused on some elements of search that people found weren't as user-friendly as it could be. So we took that feedback on, we're editing that as we speak, and hopefully those changes will reflect in a few days. So as I said, it's a constantly evolving project, but I'll point out specifically what's changing, and I think you'll all agree that it will make it a lot easier. So the first thing to note is as you play with the platform, you'll see your recent searches below. You can see that I've done some of those already. So if there's something that you search for a regular amount of time, you can just easily access that here. And then we also have common searches, which were suggestions by the IESBA board. So that can also be changed, but those are common searches so that if people come in, maybe it's their first time interacting with the code, here are some starting points for them. We also have advanced filters. So this is one of the areas that we are working to amend to make this a little bit user-friendlier. So the default search is match phrase strict. And so what that means is what you type exactly as you type it is what will be searched. So if you use financial audit, it will look for financial audit where it appears one word after the next. Conversely, with strict search with Boolean operators, those are operators that can help you narrow and define your search. So if you want to look for something where financial and audit exist, you could have financial and audit. At the moment, we have some instructions here about how to use it, but because when you tick Boolean, match phrase doesn't untick, it has confused some people. So just as an FYI, this option will no longer be available shortly. So that will just be the default. When you type, that will be the default. And we did that because we wanted to play off of what users are used to doing. So, when you type in Google, you're used to getting the strict search. So that will be behind the scenes. And then when you click Boolean, it will automatically kind of unclick in the back end, and then Boolean will work as it needs to. So it'll just make it a little bit easier. Those instructions will not be there. You won't need it, although we will have an explainer on how to use Boolean search in the FAQ section, just for people who might not be quite as familiar with it. For IESBA specifically, we also have 2 other filters, which is you can search just where there's requirements or just where there's explicit prohibitions. And then equally on the right, you can search everything, which is the default, or you can deselect and choose a specific part that you want to search in. A couple other notes about search. So for example, if we want to look up accounting estimate, all right, I think I just confused it a little bit there. No, okay. Well, as you can see, there's things happening all the time, but what should happen when you search a defined term is that the definition will come up first, and then you'll have all of the results after. See if Boolean wants to work for me. Yeah. So here you'll see the results where it has the 2 terms within the same paragraph that you've looked for. We've created it so that you can see the first 3 to 4 lines to try and figure out whether that is indeed the area that you want to go to. And you'll see here we have sort by relevancy and appearance. So appearance is obviously in chronological order. Relevancy is something that we are going to remove for now, but will come back because effectively, the way that it works is as the search engine gains more and more information. So for example, if somebody searches for financial and internal audit and they always go to here first, the engine will start picking up, okay, that's the most relevant result because that's where the most people go to. So that just is a function that needs more user input in the first instance. But that will be enhanced as more and more people use it. So we do encourage you to use it. To get to where you need to go, you simply click the arrow and it will take you to the relevant paragraph that you're looking at. Another note here, some of the feedback that we received from beta testing was that this was great, but what if they wanted to go back to their previous search and choose another result? So what we're going to be implementing is that the search will actually open in a new window. So that way the search result will still be on the original window. And if that's not what you were looking for or needed, you can easily just go back to that search and click on another result. And then finally, we just have in the lower left-hand corner here, get PDF. So that takes you to where the standards are. Because that's a static link, we can't take you directly into that version because then for every future version of the standards, it would always take you into the 2020 handbook, but here people can easily click on the PDF and get a copy. We also have the permissions policy and contact IESBA. A quick note on the permissions policy. So one of the things we get a lot of feedback on, and I'm sure a lot of you probably feel this, is the desire to copy and paste some of the text, particularly in your kind of day-to-day work. So what we have done is we have allowed you to copy and paste a set amount of content. It's about a page long at a time, because we thought this would help with the kind of uses where that kind of copy and pasting is allowable. So if you need to use it in kind of your work, share with a colleague, reference it later, whatever the case might be. But if you are looking to obviously reproduce the entirety of the handbook, we would ask that you continue to do so via the appropriate permissions policy. Another question that I anticipate will come up is, can we license this to other organizations? This has been developed with the ability to do that, as well as with the ability to host other languages. So that was something that we knew was really important, particularly to the IESBA. So when we started developing, we wanted to make sure that was possible. Our goal here is to get the platform out and ensure its functionality and that everything's working before we kind of look into potentially licensing this. But it has been on, top of mind. So that functionality is available, as well as putting in text in other languages. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on the platform, as well as printing or other forms of the materials going forward. And appreciate the time to show you this brief demonstration.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michelle, for the demonstration. This is quite interesting, I must say. I would like to see if members have questions or clarifications or observations about this. So please, if you do, raise your hand and ask Michelle. Brian.
Thanks. Well, in great demo. Obviously, the technology gods always have some kind of a little hiccup for technology presentations, and that's just the way life works. Not to worry. Just wanted to provide kudos and thanks to the design and development team, including Deanne, from the eCode advisory group, which folks might remember consists of Jens Engelhardt, Misha Peters, and myself. We were part of the beta testing group, among other stakeholders from the IESBA, so that was great. And I know we sent in a variety of, operational feedback items and suggestions for improvement that you would obviously expect during beta testing. But by and large, we thought that the project has moved along really well, and it's looking good. Michelle, can you give us an indication on the sort of next steps now, the timing, release, public release, that kind of idea?
Sure. So in terms of the next steps, we are still working on implementing a few of the changes. As you noted, we collected the beta testing feedback. A lot of it was really positive, and we really focused on what areas most people thought could use improvement. So with the search being one of them, we wanted to implement that before we launched it, as well as any other bugs that people might find. I mean, just things that happened from the ingestion and formatting process and things like that. My hope is that pending the changes all go well, and the majority of them should be implemented hopefully by end of week or early next week. My hope is that we will launch in about 3 to 4 weeks. And we also have comms working on the back end, both from an IFAC perspective and an SSB specific perspective, to help share that story and create collateral that the boards can use in marketing that as well.
Thank you, Michelle. Ken?
Yeah, I had 3 comments really, and I think thanks, Michelle. I think this is a great presentation. I couldn't be more delighted as to how this has come together. It's been quite a journey since this started, working with the other standard setting boards. But I'm delighted to see it all come through now. And what I'm particularly pleased about is to actually see the standards of the other boards sitting next to the codes, sort of side by side, and in particular the standards of the IFAC, as we work very closely with the audit board. And the code itself does contain a number of references to the ISOs, the assurance standards in the IFAC's handbook. So it's going to be handier to have the standards of the IFAC basically available at our fingertips. So that's great. My second comment is really about the importance of the resources, and and I do think we need to make sure that we give as much visibility and accessibility to the resources. So it's the basic conclusions, the FAQs in particular. We spend a lot of time on those, and any of the material of the technical nature that assists in understanding the code and applying it on a consistent basis. So I think that's going to be quite critical. And my final point is that this tool really has the capacity and the promise of even greater adoption of the tool all around the world. And I would really encourage IFAC, as much as it can, to promote this tool, because it makes it so easy for users to access it. Anybody basically who has a link, to the internet, or even if the EIS can be downloaded, on a mobile device. Basically, there's no reason why jurisdictions ought not to really embrace the code and embrace the other international standards. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Ken. And just to respond to a couple of those points, in terms of the resources, we developed the resources so that it's very easy to upload. So I've done all of them myself for all 3 standard setting boards, and it really is very quick to do. Of course, IFAC doesn't want to choose the resources that go in there because that's a board decision. And we built on the great work that was done by the eCode advisory group in the first instance. So I made sure that all of the resources that were in eCode 1.0 have made it over to eCode 2.0. But of course, if there are additional resources that need to be included, we can very easily do that. So that's not a problem at all. And in terms of the promotion, that's also something that we've really been working on in the back end. Hopefully, Ken, you'll be happy to hear we engaged with this great firm that makes infographics, and we're working on that right now to kind of create a narrative and appealing sort of visual that can be used both by IFAC and the SSBs for promotion. And then subsequently that infographic will be animated as well, which hopefully will add an additional layer of interest. So we've been working diligently behind the scenes with comms to make sure that we're going to be promoting it via all the relevant avenues, because we agree. I think this tool is incredibly key to adoption and implementation, and we want to give it the most visibility we can. And also feedback is incredibly critical to something like this. So we want to be able to gather as much feedback as we can so we know how to prioritize subsequent phases and the features that will be represented in it.
Thank you. I see Rich Huskin.
Yes, well, first of all, Michelle, thank you to you and the entire team and all those who've been involved. This is it really looks like an outstanding tool, and will make people accessing and using the code easier and more effective. I have a simple question. I was able to get into it and follow along with you on my own machine here using your URL, but I couldn't seem to find a link anywhere on the IESBA homepage to this. The links to the code go to an old version of the eCode, I think.
Yeah, so this hasn't been launched yet. So I'm just providing a demo to the boards, as I mentioned, so you guys get some familiarity with it before it actually launches to the public, so that you can kind of understand it and, as I said, sort of champion it. The same thing happened with the IESBA presentation. People saw the URL and went to it, which is perfectly fine. I'm more than happy for people within this board to play around with the tool. I would just ask that this isn't shared widely yet, because as I said, it's not launched. It's not the final version yet. We're still working on some updates. And once it's actually launched, there will indeed be a link both on IESBA and IFAC's page.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else from the board that would like to make a remark at this point?
I don't see anyone, Stavros.
Okay, I would like to also make comments in closing. First of all, I should say that I'm very happy with the journey and very happy with the point which we have arrived at. In the beginning, I was worried because the eCode had been developed and developing the other 2 pieces would simply delay us. But I'm very happy that we're there and we have all the standards together, which, by the way, is also very helpful for the coordination that we do with the IESBA. So congratulations for that, and please keep up the energy and the work. I want to reiterate 2 points here, Michelle. First of all, that we're, of course, very interested about the availability of the platform to users around the world, essentially to national standard setters, and the ability to impose on the platform a different language, translations, and so forth. So this is, for us, very critical from a strategic viewpoint, because we are, of course, devoting a lot of resources to adoption and implementation. So that's one point I'm interested in. The other is 2 things that we had with the eCode and I'm wondering if they will be available. First of all, a facility that allowed monitoring the usage and the the visitors to these standards, and secondly, if you will, a feedback mechanism. That is, how do you get comments or reactions from the users that enable you to improve this? Because it's going to be a living digital document here. So these are my two questions about the future once we put this out to the public. How does this process go?
Sure, thank you, Stavros. So to your first point, we knew that the ability to license was critical to IESBA in particular, and I think there's probably interest from the other boards as well. So in developing the platform, we ensured that it was a platform that could be transferable, and it was developed to be able to host other languages. Obviously, there will be some lift in getting it transferred. Likely, whatever organization chooses to license it will have to interact with developers to make sure that it's all set up appropriately. But that's an IT issue. The core point being it is transferable and you can put in your languages in there. That was a key thing when we were deciding which development platform to use. So noted, and hopefully concerns are assuaged because, again, that was at the forefront of our minds. In terms of your other two questions, monitoring usage, absolutely. The platform is integrated with Google Analytics, and we'll actually be having by way of the advisory group, we'll be having a demo with our developers so that they can give us a little bit more of a robust look into Google Analytics, exactly what we can do. There's reports that are very easily available from that. And again, we do want to monitor that usage because we want to see where are people going, how long are they spending there, what are they doing with the standards, because we think it's useful not only for us, but for the boards in terms of thinking how to develop the standards in the future. So that will absolutely be there. And also since the eCode, Claudio, who's our head of IT at IFAC, has joined. So he obviously brings with him additional expertise that can help with that. And the feedback mechanism, we have created an email that I have access to for the EIS. And so that will be inserted into the platform so that people can provide feedback. I think probably at this point, we'll just have it via email, but if we decide to kind of make it a little bit more programmatic, there might be a form to fill back, but there will absolutely be a feedback mechanism, and it won't be just to, IESBA or the boards. We don't want to inundate anybody on the boards with that kind of email. So there will be an EIS specific email to provide feedback.
Thank you very much. Just a follow-up question. Is there any time frame you can suggest for the availability of the platform to national standard setters?
We don't have a concrete one now. I think we do want to take at least 3 to 6 months to make sure that everything's operating appropriately. I mean, there might be the potential to kind of pilot it as we were intending to do with eCode 1.0, just to see how that process is going. But I anticipate we would want a few months of testing to make sure everything's working properly before we transfer it over to another organization.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is good news, as I said in the beginning. And thank you for the energy and the work. And certainly we will be very interested in seeing the developments as we go forward. Thank you indeed, Michelle.
I have one question for Michelle. Yeah, Michelle, I think I know the answer to this question, but I just want to get it on the record. So when this new platform is ultimately launched, will users of eCode 1.0 still be able to access it, or will they be redirected to the new platform?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That's a great question. So the URL will still exist for the current eCode, but so as to not add confusion between what's the most updated platform, the URL will redirect directly to the IESBA handbook here. But for anybody who's saved the URL or has that as a save icon on their phone or anything like that, they won't kind of find an empty link. It will just redirect once we're confident that this is functional and good to go.
But until such time, obviously, the eCode 1.0 is up. So there's no disruption.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I don't think any of my colleagues have any further comment. Again, it's great work, and we look forward to its becoming live and used by a lot of people. Okay, thank you and your colleagues very much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, we have come to the end of our session today. The plan is that we have another meeting tomorrow. Tomorrow, Friday. By now, I'm completely confused with the times.
12 a.m. Eastern on Friday, which is just a couple hours from now for those of us in the US.
Okay. I think it's about 12 hours from now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. I think it was good to share the pain, and I see the happiness in the eyes of some of our participants here. Robert, for example, that there are some convenient times. So it has worked, but it has just been a little confusing. I'm trying to read on two sides of a sheet of paper here about the different times. Anyway, this was, I believe, a very rich discussion today and very constructive for the technology project. And I want to thank you all for the diligence and the remarks that were made. Tomorrow, we are going to do two things, tax planning and related services, and long association post-implementation review. Then the last day, which I've planned, it's September 27th, which is 2 Mondays forward, and that's engagement team. Yeah. Okay. So be well, go well. Thank you all very much. Get a good rest, and see you again in 12 hours to discuss tax planning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Go well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.